In the world of studying, there are two types of students. Let's meet student A, who has been grinding away for 8 long hours, fueled by their third cup of coffee, surrounded by highlights and textbooks, endlessly reading notes and going through flashcards. Now let's contrast this with student B. This student has figured out how to have a focused 2-hour study session. They know exactly what to review, how to make the best of their time, and they don't waste it on pointless highlighting or rereading the textbook over and over again. As exam day arrives, who do you think walks away with the best grade? That's right, it's student B. But how is that possible when they seem to put in much less effort? In this video, I'm going to share 7 practical tips to help you study more efficiently and achieve the grades you want without all the extra stress. I graduated with straight 9s at GCSE, 4 A stars at A level, and I earned my master's in mechanical engineering from Oxford by using these strategies to keep studying manageable and even enjoyable. And you can do it too. I wasn't always the best student. I didn't grasp concepts instantly, but I managed to achieve these things without any talent or without any magic. It was simply some effort and some efficient studying. Let's dive into the first tip. Tip 1, stop worrying so much about how many hours you're studying. It's easy to get caught up in the amount of time spent rather than focusing on how effective your study session is. I get it, it's hard to measure how successful you are. Time seems like a straightforward way to gauge that, but it often doesn't reflect the reality. For example, if I study for 5 hours, how do I actually spend that time? Am I just rereading or highlighting, or am I quizzing myself, explaining concepts to someone else, and tackling areas where I struggle the most? Those two strategies will lead to very different results. Now that we've set the right mindset, let's move on to tip number 2, read in reverse. It might sound strange, but this tactic can really help, especially if you're cramming before an exam. Instead of diving headfirst into a long chapter the night before, start at the end. Look at the chapter summaries and key points first before working your way back to the start. When you get to the beginning, don't just read the chapter straight through. Instead, do a quick overview, check the headings, charts, bolded terms, and any highlighted sections to grasp the main ideas. While this gives you a good frame of reference, you might still be missing some key details. So then, do a second pass, but again skip the traditional reading. Focus on the first paragraph of each section, skim the body paragraphs, and read the last paragraph. After this second glance, you should have a good understanding of the chapter. If you have some extra time, then you can go back and read every word carefully. Tip 3, batch your tasks. A common issue many students face is something called context switching. The way you think while reading is completely different from the way you need to think when writing. And jumping between tasks takes time, a process I like to call transition cost. For example, if you spent an hour working through difficult calculus problems, then switch to writing an English essay, you'll likely spend the first 10 to 15 minutes of writing actually just getting adjusted to the new task. To save time while studying, you should limit these transitions by using a technique called batching. Batching is super simple. Group related tasks together and tackle them all at once. Instead of bouncing back and forth between maths problems, writing a paper, science revision, and history work, focus on math and science first, then do essays afterwards. This way you only switch your mental gears once instead of multiple times. I use batching for everything. Within your batch, you might also find that some tasks are easier than others. I always recommend starting with the simplest task first in any batch. This makes it easier to transition into the next task. For instance, if you're working on writing tasks like essays and discussion posts, start with the discussion post since it requires least effort. Then you can move on to the outline and the essays and the more difficult tasks. Tip 4, set time limits for yourself. One easy way to study less is to give yourself less time. And this may sound like a joke, but it's serious. There's a principle known as Parkinson's law, which simply states that work expands to fill the time you give it. This means that the more time you set aside for a task, the longer it will take to complete it. For instance, if you plan to take 3 days to finish an essay, guess what? It will probably take you the full 3 days. But if you challenge yourself to get it done in just 3 hours, you might be surprised how quickly you can actually finish it. While having extra time for assignments can be nice, too much time often leads to procrastination and just a slower overall pace. A great way to take advantage of Parkinson's law is to set a timer when starting an assignment. First, guess how long it'll take you to finish and then reduce that time by 20%. You might be amazed how quickly you can start to wrap up your work. Tip number 5, don't get stuck. This one comes from my GCSE physics teacher. While completing homework or during an exam, you're bound to encounter questions that really stump you. I'm not talking about tricky questions, but ones that you genuinely can't solve no matter what you try. And in these cases, it's important to set aside your pride and ego and just move on. I struggled with this when I was a student, and I would often spend 20-30 minutes, even hours on a given problem, only to feel guilty about moving on without finishing it. This ties into a psychological concept called sunk cost. If you're familiar, the sunk cost fallacy happens when someone is hesitant to abandon a strategy because they've already invested time or effort into it, even if it would be better to move on. Just because you spent time wrestling with a problem doesn't mean you should waste even more time staying stuck. It's often better to tackle the other questions first and come back to the difficult one later. Be okay with answering questions out of order if you're doing homework. Also, try starting with the last problems and then working your ways to the first, or try an easier one and then a harder one. Do whatever feels right. The same goes for exams. Don't feel like you have to answer all the questions in order, obviously unless they logically build on one another. Look for questions you can tackle and start with those, and then move on to the rest. Everyone forgets that there's a psychological part to exams as well. Tip 6. Prioritize simpler tasks. Tasks typically fall into two categories: fixed tasks and variable tasks. Fixed tasks are usually straightforward and don't require much thought, like making flashcards, and variable tasks require much more mental effort, such as writing essays or brainstorming ideas. Fixed tasks always have a fixed time, variable tasks have a variable time to complete. So my tip is, it's best to take care of the fixed tasks first. Why? Because if you tackle variable tasks at the beginning, they'll tend to drag on over time. This is where Parkinson's law comes in. Fixed tasks, on the other hand, are consistent and won't inflate your time needed. By doing fixed tasks first, you create a natural limit for the variable tasks. They may still take some time, but this way you can fit everything in. This is a strategy I've been following for years. And tell me in the comments, is this something that resonates with you? Have you tried similar strategies in the past? Finally, tip 7, tag your notes. Many students waste time rereading notes, and I've done it too. This often happens as exams approach and we start to panic, thinking, I have a test on unit 3, better go through everything now. The truth is that within any unit, some topics we know well and others we don't know as well. To study more efficiently, focus less time on topics you're already comfortable with and more on ones that you aren't. That's where tagging notes comes in handy. While in your class, if your teacher explains something that confuses you, just put a star or some other symbol next to that point. This way, when it's time to review, you can quickly identify the areas that need your attention. If you forget to tag during the lecture, you can do it afterwards. Just skim through your notes and mark anything you're not sure about. Well, that wraps up today's video. I hope you find these tips useful and try and implement them. And while you're here, let me know how your school or university is going. Are you enjoying it? Is it tough? I'd really love to hear your experience. And if you've enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to keep up to date on everything that I have to share. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.